Hello,
Good afternoon.
welcome to our show. This is your host, Sandeep Pednekar, and you're watching One Universe, the show that's based on the non-profit One Universe that promotes positivity through the promotion of love, peace, and harmony. When we talk about good and positive things, many times we have to consider bad things. When we talk about those bad things, we have to know that these are the problems associated in our society. Only then can we overcome them. So we have to first define the problems, and once we very well define the problems, then we have to find solutions for that. And this is one of the problems that we are going to talk about today, which is crime and domestic violence in Memphis and Shelby County. We have lots of issues throughout the country, but the fact is that Memphis is listed almost at the top of that list. It's a very bad situation. How do we change those things? What are the factors that bring about changes in our community, in our society, to take things from worse to bad and then take it to good and better, is what we are going to talk about. And for that, I have welcomed our guest today, Judge Greg Gilbert. Hello.
Hello.
And
Thank you for
welcome to
having
the
me.
show. Yes, you're very, very welcome. So, Judge, before we get started, please introduce yourself to the listeners and viewers.
Okay. My name is Greg Gilbert. I'm the current judge of the Domestic Violence Court. I am a native Memphian, born and raised in Memphis, except for a very short period when I was young. I was in Florida for a short period. I've been in Memphis all my life. I really plan to stay here all of my life.
Very good.
And I really hope to make the community a better place. Certainly found my calling in domestic violence of all things. It's strange to think that you can have a positive message with such a topic, but I think in some ways, if we look at the issues and confront the issues, that it can be a positive, a learning, teaching tool for
Very
everyone.
true. Very true. Please tell about yourself and your family.
Okay, so I've been married for 23 years. I have two children. I have one in college and one about to start college next week. I was actually talking to my daughter, and she was, concerned about what her major is and what she's going to do. And I told her, said, no worries, that you don't have to find your calling, that sometimes your calling will find you. And certainly in my case, that has been true. And I have been working, I've been a judge since for a year, almost a year now. Prior to that, I was a prosecutor for 22, almost just shy of 23 years. And again, like I say, I've been born and raised in Memphis, and all of my family's from Memphis. I'm kind of an odd bird. I think everyone I went to school with has moved away, but I'm still here.
So you said you got married at the age of 10, right?
Exactly.
Right, okay.
Exactly. Yes. I've been married 23 years. I have to second guess that, but that is absolutely right.
Good,
Yes.
good. So, congratulations on being the judge.
Thank you very much.
I know it has been already an year, but it's a process of this long journey.
Yes.
So, please tell us what exactly are the cases within domestic violence that you deal with.
Okay, so by statute, domestic abuse are the cases that I handle within my court. I have, there's a second courtroom we have that handle orders of protection, which is more of a civil matter. I am primarily responsible for the criminal cases that come through, all cases initiated by arrest involving domestic abuse, and that can be, it's pretty specific offenses. Domestic assault is clearly the hands above all other charges where we have, but aggravated assaults involving weapons, strangulation, or any other kind of deadly weapon, we get a fair number of those. Rape, even robberies. We get robberies between intimate partners, and it runs the gamut. There's not a lot of, we even get a few thefts, car thefts, which is technically not domestic abuse, but if it involves intimate parties, we handle those cases as well. And we handle, I don't have the numbers for this past year, but while I was the prosecutor, probably about 6,000 cases coming into the system via my courtroom every year.
Okay. So 6,000 every year.
Mm-hmm.
What are the number of cases in the court right now coming to you?
You know, I would say we get about, it came down to between 500 and 600 cases each month. And that's cases initiated by physical arrest. It does not include cases where a direct indictment has taken place, which is just a fraction. There's not a lot of those cases. Law enforcement locally do mostly warrants and arrests.
Okay.
And domestic violence is unique because officers can issue an arrest warrant for a misdemeanor that did not occur in their presence, as long as the victim alleges that it happens. The law recognizes, because very often a victim of domestic violence has other issues to deal with. They need to maybe relocate quickly, and time is of the essence, that the victims don't always have to come down and swear in front of a judge that facts happen. Officers can do it for them. And we get a fair number of cases initiated straight from officer warrants. Probably the majority of our cases, because often offenders on the scene leave the scene because they know the police are on the way. And so it's about 6,000 a year, pretty consistently. Domestic violence, we've had a tremendous uptick in homicides in Shelby County since, I guess, 2016.
Right.
It does correspond with our loosening of the gun laws. I'll just leave that there. There is a definite correlation. But domestic violence numbers of homicides and arrests, pretty consistent. It's a pervasive part of the community. It is a mindset that I would love to change. That's really my goal. My goal is domestic violence cases are the hardest to prosecute. They're a huge number are dismissed because of victims do not want to prosecute, and so you have to find alternatives to incarcerating people. Very often, the abuser is the mother or father of a child in common, and they need support. And so we do a lot of counseling, a lot of probation, a lot of trying to teach offenders where their behavior went wrong. Some learn, some don't, but we just keep trying.
Okay. And what has your background being a prosecutor taught you? So you have had several experiences in all of this time.
Well,
so how did it work out for you?
So there's a lot of different ways being a prosecutor changed my outlook. But I think what drew me to this area, I guess you would call it, is as a child, my father was abusive. He was alcoholic, he was abusive. And my mother, when I was just under 2 years old, she was able to escape him, came back home to family here in Shelby County. Luckily, she had family here, had the tools to kind of escape the abuse. And so I did not, at least I don't remember a lot of the abusive scenarios, but I have 3 older brothers, and I saw the impact that witnessing and living through that. And my mother, obviously the stories of how we were able to escape, kindness of strangers and helping us with bus tickets, diapers for me. It's something that I grew up hearing about constantly and seeing.
I've been dealing with just the bare basics.
Yes,
of life.
And I realized that any trauma, I guess we recognize that now, but back then, this was in the early 70s, kids witnessing traumatic events, it affects your future. It affects your outlook on the world. It directly affects the nature of your relationships with those around you. If you're willing to fight with your family members, you're willing to fight with anyone. And so you learn at home. And that's why I think that shining a spotlight on domestic violence, acknowledging its existence, that it's such a pervasive problem, that we think about that, and maybe we'll recognize that, frankly, most of the cases, and I'll get to when I was a prosecutor. The thing that really struck me when I first started as a prosecutor, I got arrest tickets, I got fact patterns, and what made me realize, well, I'm getting the victim's perspective from talking to a police officer, and I always thought back to my experience. Well, I was a child and I saw some of this stuff. That's never in the police report. And so I would, informally ask officers or witnesses when I would prepare hearings. I was like, well, were there kids in that house? Were they there? Oh yeah, they were there. Would they have seen this? And inevitably they'd say, well, if they didn't see it, they at least heard it. And so I realized that my experience was like many other people, that this is a huge problem within our community. And I think the recent research bears that out. The ACEs, the adverse childhood events analysis, that witnessing traumatic events, it changes kids. It changes their perspective on the world, maybe even changes their chemistry of the brain.
Yeah.
And so it's so important that we
And it has a lifelong impact on them and their behavior.
in ways that even I, as a 50-year-old man, are beginning to realize affects not just my relationships, but just my, I guess, the way that I see the world. I'm more likely to be pessimistic, more likely to see the downside of things, because you always expect things to end in violence or arguments or those kinds of things. And so it really colors the way you look at the world when you see these things and experience these things.
Right. So having your personal experience as well as your experience in the prosecutor's office, how has that, you already explained how that is helping you currently.
Yes.
But how has that explained when you look at the case in the court now, not as a prosecutor, but as a thing, how, when it is presented by the prosecutor or by an individual or his attorney, how do you look at it?
Let me see here. I guess it's because I do have my personal experience with violence, but I also have my experience with being in a courtroom and the law, and my goal is I have to be fair and impartial. I'm a judge. And I think the fact that I've seen so many of these cases, in some ways I can be more positive. I do recognize that there are certain cases that come through immediately. You recognize, okay, this is adults behaving badly. They're having a terrible breakup, maybe a marriage, but it may just be, they've been dating for a short period of time and they're not dealing with their emotions well in this event that's happening in their lives that's ripping their relationship apart. And so we get a fair number of cases where you realize, okay, this is probably, once this relationship's over, this is going to be done. And then I recognize, no, we have a certain percentage of people who come in who just, unfortunately, are probably incorrigible, and they're going to continue to do this. And I see them come through. They move from one victim to the next. When one victim is finally able to break free from their behavior, they find another. And it's a very controlling, and so those are the ones that stand out. And I guess even now with there's been more research, there are indicators that we see that indicate future violence. Strangulation is something that we didn't realize when I first started. Wow. That is a strong correlation between strangulation and future violence and homicide. And so when you see those cases. When I first started as a prosecutor, you kind of just, well, that's just an assault, no big deal. At the time, it was a misdemeanor. We didn't realize at that time that was a strong indicator of future violence. Guns being involved, obviously, guns are one of the biggest problems we have in our community. I believe in the right to bear arms. The Second Amendment, I think that I do believe in that, but I do believe that people should use guns with discretion. What is it Spider-Man said? With great great power comes great responsibility. And so if you're going to have a gun, you have to, and if you misuse that gun, then and if the community can't trust you to use that gun wisely, there's going to be consequences. And that's one of my personal strangulation and gun crime. I think are two of the things that really stand out, that there need to be consequences, because we've got to send a strong message to the community about those cases. And so I think I've gotten away from the original question a little bit, but being a prosecutor, the great thing about being a prosecutor and the volume, if there can be a great thing about that, is that you see so many cases and you see the patterns, and you're able to look at people's histories and sort of recognize, okay, this is someone who's really dangerous. And then you look at other fact patterns, you're like, okay, this is maybe some remedial measures need to be taken, and we can change this before it gets worse.
So, fortunately, you and I serve on a domestic violence task force
Right.
for the city and county, and you did a presentation, and I was thoroughly impressed with what you did. You were talking about what used to be the system and the things that you saw that needed to be changed.
Right.
You have changed some. I think you might want to change some more.
Yes.
Can you talk about that?
So, and I'll do a little shout out for the Shelby County Crime Commission, because they've really, Bill Gibbons and his organization, the great thing that they do is they bring the players to the table, law enforcement, the courts, victim advocates, everyone involved, and have sort of made us put our heads together and collaborate and look at sort of the big picture. The problem you run into with law enforcement is it's always going to be underfunded. You can never fund law enforcement the way you need it, or the court system, because of the volume. And you don't have time to look at what the other team is doing, because it really is a collaborative effort. Law enforcement makes the arrests. Hopefully they do good investigations. The defense attorneys will hold their feet to the fire if they do a poor investigation. And so it's incumbent that not only defense attorneys, but myself, the judge, educate law enforcement about the cases and what cases are working, what's not, and the grand plan, what would make things better. My goal is to make victims safer. And two of the things that we've really hit in our sitting down and putting our heads together as a group, one is there's a lack of shortage of housing for victims of domestic violence. That's one of the biggest thing I see when victims won't come to court. It's because they're I guess they're literally married. If they're not married, they're literally married to their abuser, because they either live together or rely on them for funding, for supporting the children. Maybe they have the car. Maybe there's a lot of reasons why a victim is not going to want to come forward, and housing is one of those big components. If you can relocate them to a place where they feel safe, they're more willing to stand up to their abuser. And what's the old saying? How do you fight a bully? How do you stand up to a bully? You stand up to them. And I try, as a prosecutor, I tried to explain to victims that if you don't prosecute today, it could hurt you tomorrow.
And over again.
And the only way, yes, that you've got to stand up now, because it's just going to get worse. And it's unfortunately, domestic violence it's a crime of control, and it does escalate as the abuser feels they're losing control. They often they're nice, and then it gets worse, and then they're nice, and then it gets worse. And so we've tried to get housing. That's one of our big focus points, trying to get funding, parties to take care of that. And then one of the other things, it's a result of, it's come to a head, I guess, because we have a new bond court. And we've entered into an agreement with the ACLU here in Shelby County that any offender who does not make their bond, any accused offender, I'm saying that I don't presume anyone's guilty, but anyone who's been arrested and charged with a crime in Shelby County has a right to a bond hearing, and we try to do it within 48 hours. The thing about domestic violence is it's different than other offenses. Let's say you're robbed by a stranger. Odds are the person who robbed you is not going to know where you live. You're not going to you're going to be upset. You'll communicate with law enforcement, maybe prosecutors, and you're likely to come to court. You want consequences for what happened. With domestic violence offenders, they are not likely to come to court, and there is a huge probability that the offender is going to contact them. Even every day we would get situations where someone from the jail calls the victim, "Baby, please don't come," even if they're nice. "Baby, please don't come to court." It influences the victim. They feel guilty for cooperating with law enforcement, and it makes the victim feel responsible for even having this scenario come forward. So what we've tried to do is recognize that in domestic violence, bonds, you're less likely to get an ROR bond because the statistics show the offender is likely to contact the victim. There's a higher risk to an individual victim. In Tennessee law, which has not been used very much to date, and the bond, in setting bond, a judge has to consider not just the offender's likelihood to come to court, but the facts of the case and the risk to the individual victim. And so trying to educate our law enforcement, trying to make sure that the magistrates who set the bond get the information from law enforcement on the scene about the facts of the case. Was this a strangulation case, which again is a high indicator? Was there a gun? There's about a dozen questions that they use in a lethality assessment that assist law enforcement in determining if someone's more likely to reoffend. And so making sure that law enforcement put those facts in their report, they recognize those so that the magistrates can see those and then set appropriate bonds to make sure victims are safer. And we're working on trying to put all those pieces together. And it's, some parts of it are easy, parts of it are complicated.
Right. So before we go ahead, I definitely want to appreciate and acknowledge the work that has gone into it, the thought process, and your reasoning make a whole lot more sense of why these changes were necessary. It's not that earlier it was bad, but you're trying to make it even better than what it already was.
Yes.
What are the few changes that you think need to be done that have not yet been accomplished, or you have it in the pipeline, so to say?
Well, I can tell you at least one thing that I am trying to do, or I have been doing, which I hope makes a difference. Every year we have a consistent number of homicides with victims who are domestic violence victims. And the last couple of years that I was a prosecutor, we had, I think it was a half a dozen, about 6 young ladies, they were all women, who were killed by abusers who were out on bond or on probation for domestic assault offenses. And Tennessee law says that if an offender picks up is charged with a new crime while they're on bond for another crime, the judge can revoke their bond or increase or completely revoke and take away their bond and take them back into custody. And I saw a good opportunity to, because domestic violence is predictable, we have many offenders who, they don't pick up just one case, they'll have 3, 4, 5, 6 cases on the same victim in the system at the same time. And it drove me crazy because a judge could stop that. A judge, when they picked up the new case, they could revoke the bond and take them back into custody. So
because that law was already in existence, but it was not.
It's been on the books for quite some time. There was a case in 2016 that really, there was a debate whether or not a judge could hold someone without bond because our Constitution guarantees a bond. And the case is State v. Bergens, and I believe it's 2016, made it very clear that no, if you pick up a case, you can forfeit your right to bond by being arrested and charged with a new crime. And so I've been using that law to take individuals in custody when they violate my bond conditions, pick up new criminal offenses. And I don't know if it's been a year. I don't. Our homicide rate, I think, is lower than it has been. Knock on wood. But that is one of the things that I've tried to do as a judge. That I see as my responsibility to try to. It even helps the offender. De-escalates the behavior. It stops them from. To me, the message when they assaulted someone, and then got a new case and got like a minimal $1,000 bond or something. It's the message to them was the court system was going to do nothing, and they were going to keep doing it. And so I've at least tried to send the message that no, this judge is going to stop you, and hopefully it's making a difference. We'll see. I guess time will tell. As of right now, I think our homicide rate in domestic violence is down a little bit.
Yeah.
So we'll see.
True. As you see, ladies and gentlemen, we have a judge who is making a positive impact on our community. The issues that we are talking about are definitely negative. But when we look at those and we define and redefine what the problems and issues are, it gives way to finding solutions. The solutions probably have existed but never implemented. So first of all, we have to implement those solutions and then find solutions that are really good and beneficial, not just for the victims, but community at large, because that is what the main goal is of the court system.
Yes.
So, Judge, I do want to say that we would like to have you on our show over and over again, talking about several issues.
Absolutely.
And related to domestic violence and crime as such. But we definitely thank you for being on our show.
Thank you for having me. I enjoyed it. I'll come back anytime.